standing before my father's casket and more than 40 people. My brother announced he would sell our family home to cover his gambling debts. My mother simply nodded, yet no one there knew my father had guarded a secret for 15 years, one that would speak for him when he could not. The real reckoning did not happen at the cemetery. It happened inside a boardroom, where the truth was finally read aloud, line by shattering line. My name is Isla James. I was 39 years old, standing in the front row of a cramped funeral home in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. When my life as I knew it was dismantled in exactly 4 sentences, the sky outside was a relentless, flat sheet of slate gray, the kind of midwinter Ohio gloom that does not suggest rain, but rather promises a long, bone-aching freeze. Inside the viewing room, the air was stiflingly warm and smelled of industrial carpet cleaner, fighting a losing battle against the cloying scent of 3 dozen white lily arrangements. There were over 40 people squeezed into the room: aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors from Cedar Hollow Drive who had known me since I was in pigtails, and a handful of my father's old colleagues from the logistics firm. They sat on folding metal chairs that groaned under the collective weight of their discomfort. Everyone was looking at the front of the room, but no one was looking at the casket. They were looking at my brother. Grant stood behind the walnut podium, gripping the sides with white-knuckled intensity. He was wearing a black suit that fit him a little too perfectly, the fabric shimmering slightly under the track lighting. Grant had always known how to dress the part. Today, the part was the grieving, responsible son, the pillar of the family, the man stepping into the void left by a patriarch. He cleared his throat, a sound that was amplified by the microphone, causing a sharp whine of feedback that made several elderly aunts wince. He looked down at our mother, Marjorie, who sat in the center of the front row, clutching a lace handkerchief she had not actually used to wipe any tears. She looked small, fragile, and utterly composed. "Dad loved that house," Grant said, his voice cracking at precisely the right syllable. It was a performance. I knew my brother better than anyone in that room. I knew his tells. When Grant was genuinely upset, he got quiet. He got mean. When he was performing, he got loud and tremulous. He loved every brick of it, but he loved Mom more. I felt a cold prickle of unease crawl up my spine. I shifted my weight, my heels sinking slightly into the plush burgundy carpet. I had not spoken to Grant in 3 weeks, not since the day Dad died. I had been too busy handling the death certificates, the obituary, the catering, and the logistics that death demands of the living. Grant had been busy too, apparently, just not with anything helpful. "And that is why," Grant continued, lifting his head to scan the room, his eyes sliding right over me as if I were a ghost. "After much prayer and discussion, we have decided to sell the family home on Cedar Hollow Drive." The room went silent, not the respectful silence of mourning, but the shocked, sharp intake of breath that comes before a scandal. "It is too much for Mom to manage alone," Grant said, his voice gaining strength, shifting from grief to sales pitch. "The maintenance, the taxes, the memories. It is time to downsize, to liquidate the asset so Mom can be comfortable, to handle the financial burdens that, unfortunately, linger after a long illness." My head snapped toward my mother. She did not look shocked. She did not look up at her son with the confusion of a widow hearing this news for the first time. She nodded. It was a slow, deliberate movement, her chin dipping down and up. It was a seal of approval. Then, she turned her head slightly. Her eyes locked onto mine. It was a look I had known my entire life. It was the look that said, "Be quiet." It was the look that said, "Do not ruin this." It was the look that enforced the invisible hierarchy of the James family, where the men spoke and the women adjusted. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sell the house. The house Dad had built the addition on with his own hands, the house where he had spent every evening in his basement office. But it was not just the sentiment, it was the logic. Dad had life insurance. I had seen the policy paperwork years ago. There shouldn't be debts. There shouldn't be a fire sale. Grant, I whispered, the name escaping my lips before I could stop it. He ignored me. He leaned into the microphone, his expression the picture of brotherly solidarity. We have already been in talks with a buyer who understands the value of the property. We want to move quickly, to spare Mom the pain of a drawn-out process. The whole family is united on this. Isla agrees. Of course. The air left my lungs. Isla agrees. Of course. I had not been asked. I had not been consulted. I had not even been informed. I stood there, frozen, as a ripple of whispers broke out behind me. I could hear them, distinct and cutting, like static interference on a radio. Makes sense, a cousin muttered behind his hand. Grant needs the capital to get started again. Well, the daughter is grown, an older neighbor whispered to her husband. She has that job in the city. She is independent. She does not need the house. The son is the one who has to look after the mother. Isla is tough, another voice murmured. She can take care of herself. Grant has had a hard run lately. The injustice of it was so physical it made me nauseous. I was 39. I had paid my own way through college. I had built a career from nothing. I drove a 10-year-old sedan and lived in a studio apartment because I refused to take handouts. Grant was 41. He drove a leased luxury SUV he couldn't afford, had bounced between 5 careers in 10 years, and treated our parents' bank account like his personal overdraft facility. And yet, here, in this room, the narrative was already set. I was the cold, independent career woman who didn't need anything. Grant was the dutiful son carrying the weight of the family, simply doing what had to be done. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that Grant was lying, that he had never asked me, that selling the house less than a week after the funeral was insanity. I wanted to walk to that podium and shove him aside, but I didn't. I looked at my mother. Her gaze was hard, like flint. If I made a scene now, if I screamed at my father's funeral, I would not be the victim. I would be the hysterical daughter. I would be the one disrespecting the dead. They knew that. They were counting on my shame to keep me silent. They were weaponizing my own dignity against me. I clenched my hands into fists at my sides, my fingernails digging into my palms until the sharp pain grounded me. I forced myself to exhale. I would not give them the show they wanted. The service ended in a blur of hymns and hollow handshakes. The room began to empty, the crowd shuffling toward the exit, eager to get to the reception, to the food, to the gossip. Grant stepped down from the podium, immediately surrounded by a phalanx of relatives patting him on the back, praising his strength and his vision. I hung back, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I watched them. I watched the way Grant accepted the condolences, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the grieving heir to perfection. And then I saw something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Grant broke away from a conversation with our Aunt Linda and walked toward the side exit, near the heavy velvet drapes that covered the windows. He wasn't going to the restroom. He was moving with a purposeful, jerky haste. Standing there, half hidden by a decorative ficus plant, was a man I did not recognize. He did not look like a family friend. He did not look like one of Dad's trucking logistics colleagues. He was wearing a dark wool coat that looked expensive but worn. The collar turned up against the chill of the room. He wasn't holding a program. He wasn't crying. He was checking a watch on his wrist, a heavy, gold thing that caught the dim light. Grant walked up to him. He didn't hug him. He didn't shake his hand in the two-handed, comforting way he had been doing with everyone else. Grant looked terrified. I saw the man say something, his face impassive. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, white rectangle, a business card. He handed it to Grant, but he didn't let go of it immediately. There was a moment, 1 second, maybe 2, where they were both holding the card, a tug of war that spoke of power and leverage. Grant nodded rapidly, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the cold room. The man let go. He didn't say goodbye. He just turned and walked out the side door, into the biting Ohio wind. I moved closer, trying to look casual, trying to look like I was just looking for a tissue. I needed to get within earshot. My mother had joined Grant now. She was gripping his elbow, her fingers digging into the fabric of his suit jacket. They were huddled together, heads bowed, creating a private circle of panic amidst the mourners. He said 48 hours. Mom, Grant whispered. His voice was no longer the deep, resonant baritone he had used on the podium. It was thin and reedy. If we don't get the deposit to him by Friday, the interest doubles. Again. Keep your voice down, my mother hissed. She didn't look like a grieving widow anymore. She looked like a co-conspirator. I told you. The house is the only way. The agent said she can fast-track the listing. We will price it for a cash buyer. We just need to close fast. What about Isla? Grant asked. He glanced over his shoulder. I ducked my head, pretending to adjust the strap of my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Isla won't do anything, my mother said. Her voice was cold, devoid of affection, devoid of the maternal warmth everyone else thought she possessed. She never does. She will sulk. She will leave, and she will let us handle it. She is too proud to fight for money. She thinks she is above it. Make sure she signs the waiver, Grant muttered. We cannot list it until the title is clear. I will handle her, my mother said. Just don't let that man come to the house again. Your father would have died of shame if he saw that. Dad's dead. Mom, Grant snapped. He doesn't care anymore. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just about debt. It wasn't just about money. It was about survival. Grant was in deep gambling deep, shark deep, and my mother was willing to burn down our entire history to keep her golden boy warm. They were going to sell the house on Cedar Hollow Drive. The house where I had taken my first steps. The house where Dad had taught me to ride a bike. The house that was the only tangible thing left of the man who had actually loved me. And they had planned it. They had rehearsed it, while Dad was in the hospital, while I was driving back and forth from my studio apartment in a panic, while the doctors were turning off the machines. They had been calculating the equity. They had been drafting the speech. Rage, hot and purifying, began to replace the grief in my chest. They thought I was weak. They thought I was above it. They thought my silence was submission. They were wrong. They had prepared for this moment. Yes, they had the speeches and the lies and the real estate agent on speed dial. But as I looked at the back of Grant's head, watching him wipe the sweat from his neck, I realized something. I wasn't the only one who knew Grant was a disaster waiting to happen. Dad knew. Dad had always known. Dad was a man of few words, but he was a man of meticulous records. He was a man who didn't trust easily. And in his final years, he had watched Grant circle his savings like a vulture. My mind flashed back to the house on Cedar Hollow Drive, specifically, to the basement. It was a finished basement, paneled in 1970s wood, smelling of pipe tobacco and old paper. In the corner, past the pool table that no one used, was Dad's office. It was his sanctuary. No one was allowed in there, not Mom, not Grant, and definitely not the cleaning lady. He kept the door locked with a deadbolt. Inside that office, there was a gray metal filing cabinet. It was a heavy, fireproof beast of a thing that looked like it belonged in a government bunker, not a suburban home. Dad wore the key to it on a chain around his neck, hidden under his shirt. When the paramedics took him away 3 weeks ago, they had cut his shirt open. They had handed the personal effects to Mom, the watch, the wedding ring, but I had been the one to pick up his clothes from the hospital floor. I had been the one to find the small brass key that had fallen out of the chaotic pile of fabric. I had slipped it into my pocket without thinking, a reflex to protect his privacy even in death. I still had that key. It was in the zippered pocket of my purse, cold and hard against my hip. Mom and Grant thought the house was theirs to sell. They thought the story ended here, with a gavel bang and a coming soon sign on the lawn. But they had never opened that filing cabinet. I turned away from them, walking toward the exit of the funeral home into the biting gray cold. I wasn't going to the reception. I wasn't going to eat stale sandwiches and listen to people tell me how lucky I was to have a brother like Grant. I was going to Cedar Hollow Drive. I was going to the basement, because my father had prepared for this too. And I had a feeling that whatever was waiting in that bottom drawer was going to make Grant's gambling debts look like pocket change. 3 weeks before I stood in that funeral home listening to my brother auction off my history, I was asleep in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of old coffee and potting soil. It was the kind of apartment you rent when you are 39 and trying to prove a point to no one but yourself. It was a fourth-floor walk-up in downtown Columbus, with exposed brick that crumbled if you looked at it too hard, and a radiator that clanged like a prisoner rattling a tin cup against the bars. My life was contained within those 400 square feet. A particle board bookshelf from a discount store held my entire professional identity certification manuals, logistics textbooks, and a row of paperback novels I never had time to read. On the windowsill sat a single, resilient pothos plant, its vines trailing down toward the floor like desperate fingers. It was the only living thing I was responsible for, and some days, even that felt like a burden I was barely managing. My laptop was open on the small bistro table I used as a desk, the screen glowing blue in the dark. A half-finished spreadsheet blinked a cursor at me, a silent accusation of work left undone. The phone rang at 17 minutes past 4 in the morning. There is a specific frequency to a phone ringing at that hour. It does not sound like a notification. It sounds like a siren. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs before I even saw the screen. It was my mother. "Isla," she said. There was no hello. Her voice was high, tight, and vibrating with a frequency I had never heard before. "It is your father. He collapsed. We are in the ambulance." I did not ask what happened. I did not ask for details. I just said, "Which hospital?" "St. Anne's," she said. "Hurry." The line went dead. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt over my pajamas, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie my shoelaces. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, leaving the spreadsheet blinking, leaving the pothos plant in the dark. My car was a 10-year-old gray sedan with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking garage pole I had failed to see 3 years ago. It was reliable in the way a tired mule is reliable. It groaned, it complained, but it moved. As I turned the ignition, the dashboard lit up, and the check engine light stared back at me. It had been on for 6 months. I had covered it with a piece of electrical tape for a while, but the tape had peeled off in the summer heat, leaving a sticky residue. Now, the orange light was just a constant companion, a glowing reminder of maintenance deferred, of problems ignored until they became part of the landscape. It felt like a metaphor I didn't want to examine. The drive to the hospital was a blur of empty highways and green traffic lights that felt mocking in their efficiency. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the cold leather biting into my palms. I tried to pray, but the words got stuck in my throat. I hadn't spoken to my father in 2 months. The last time we had spoken, it had been a 5-minute call on his birthday. I had sent a card. I had sent a gift card to a hardware store. I had done the bare minimum required to keep the title of daughter without actually doing the work of being one. When I pulled into the emergency room parking lot, my heart sank. Right there, directly in front of the sliding glass doors, parked at an angle that suggested the driver believed lines were merely suggestions for other people, was a massive, black luxury SUV. Grant was already here. My brother always arrived first. It was his superpower. He was the first to arrive, the first to speak, the first to claim the air in the room. He drove vehicles he couldn't afford to places he hadn't been invited, and he did it with a confidence that made the world step aside. Seeing that shiny, aggressive car made my stomach turn. It meant the stage was already set. It meant the narrative was already being written, and I was just a supporting character walking onto a set that had been dressed without me. I ran inside, the antiseptic smell of the hospital hitting me like a physical wall. The receptionist pointed me toward the cardiac unit, her eyes pitying. I found them in a room at the end of the hall. Grant was standing by the bed. one hand resting on the railing, his head bowed. He was wearing a tracksuit, but his hair was perfectly coiffed, as if he slept ready for a photo opportunity. Mom was sitting in the plastic chair, clutching Dad's hand, and Dad looked small. That was the thing that shocked me the most. My father was a man who had spent 40 years working in logistics and warehousing. He was a man of steel-toed boots and heavy lifting. A man who built additions on houses and fixed engines on weekends. He was broad-shouldered and silent, a mountain of a human being, but in that bed, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires, he looked like a child. His skin was the color of old parchment. "I'm here," I gasped, rushing to the other side of the bed. Grant looked up. His eyes were dry. "You made it," he said, the way he said it. "You made it" carried a heavy, silent addendum, finally. I reached out and took Dad's other hand. It was cold. It was rough, the calluses scratching against my palm. "Dad," I whispered. His eyes were closed. His chest was rising and falling with a terrifying, mechanical rhythm, forced by the machine beside him. "He can't hear you," Mom said. Her voice was flat. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the monitor, watching the green lines trace the fading map of her husband's life. The doctor said the massive stroke happened in the kitchen. He was gone before he hit the floor. "Gone," I choked out. "But the machine?" "Just echoes," Grant said solemnly. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. "We were waiting for you to get here to turn it off." The weight of that sentence crashed down on me. They were waiting for me, not to say goodbye, because he was already gone. They were waiting for me so they could check the box. Sister arrived. "Procedure complete." I squeezed Dad's hand, desperate for a squeeze back. I wanted a twitch of a finger. I wanted a grunt. I wanted him to open his eyes and look at me with that stoic, quiet gaze he always had. I remembered our last phone call, the silence on the line. "You doing okay, Isla?" he had asked. "I'm fine, Dad. Just busy. Work is crazy." "Okay. Well, don't work too hard." "I won't. Talk to you later." That was it. That was the sum total of our final interaction. A platitude and a lie. I wasn't fine. I was lonely and broke and tired, and I wouldn't talk to him later. "I'm sorry," I whispered, pressing my forehead against the metal rail of the bed. "I'm so sorry. Dad, I wasn't just apologizing for not being there when he fell. I was apologizing for the last 10 years. I was apologizing for moving out the day I turned 18. I was apologizing for the anger I had carried like a shield. The resentment I had nursed because Mom loved Grant more and Dad had never stood up for me. I had punished him with my absence, thinking I was teaching them a lesson. But the only lesson I had learned was that time runs out, and silence, once it becomes permanent, is the loudest sound in the world. "It is time," Mom said. She stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at the doctor, who had been hovering in the doorway, and nodded. It happened fast, too fast. The beeping stopped. The hissing of the ventilator stopped. The room fell into a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the universe. Grant let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and hugged Mom. She patted his back stiffly. I stood there, holding a hand that was no longer a hand, but merely matter. I felt like an intruder. I felt like I was watching a scene through a window. I didn't know if I had the right to fall apart. The good daughter would have been there for Sunday dinners. The good daughter wouldn't have let her calls go to voicemail. I had forfeited my ticket to this grief. Hadn't I? The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in emotional evasion. If death is a chaotic event, my mother treated the aftermath like a corporate restructuring project. By the time the sun came up the morning Dad died, she had a notebook open on the kitchen table. "We need to call the funeral home," she said, her pen hovering over a fresh page. "We need to pick the flowers. Lilies are traditional, but your father hated the smell. We will get carnations. They last longer." "Whatever you want." "Mom," Grant said. He was sitting at the head of the table, Dad's seat. He had taken it without asking. He was scrolling through his phone, looking busy, looking important. "I will handle the obituary. I know a guy at the dispatch." "Good," Mom said. "Isla, you handle the catering list. And the cleaning. The house needs to be spotless for the wake." "I can help with the arrangements," I offered, my voice sounding thin in the kitchen I had grown up in. "No," Mom said without looking up. "You are good at details. Stick to the list. Grant is better with people." And there it was. The roles were cast in stone. Grant was the face of the family. I was the backstage crew. For 3 weeks, I drove back and forth between my studio and the house on Cedar Hollow Drive. I scrubbed floors until my knees bruised. I ordered sandwich platters. I fielded calls from distant relatives who wanted to know if Dad had suffered. Meanwhile, Grant was everywhere. He was in the driveway, shaking hands with neighbors, accepting casseroles with a somber nod. He was on the phone in the living room, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper whenever someone walked by. "Yeah, it is tough," I heard him say to Mrs. Higgins from next door. "But I have to be strong for Mom. You know how it is. The weight falls on the son." He wore his grief like a designer suit. It fit him too well. He knew exactly when to wipe a tear, exactly when to look stoic, exactly when to let his voice crack. It was grotesque. I watched him charm the vicar. I watched him hug the mailman. I realized then that if I didn't say something, if I didn't assert my own reality, I would vanish, in their version of the story. I was the prodigal daughter who returned only when there was a funeral to attend. I was the cold, distant career woman who let her brother carry the burden. But I knew the truth. I knew who had paid for the new roof last year when Mom couldn't find the checkbook. Me. I knew who had spent hours on the phone helping Dad navigate his Medicare enrollment because Grant was too busy with his latest business venture. Me. But none of that mattered now. History belongs to the loudest voice, and Grant had a megaphone the day before the funeral. I walked into the house on Cedar Hollow Drive. It was late afternoon, and the winter sun was slanting through the blinds, cutting the living room into strips of light and shadow. The house smelled of lemon polish and stale grief. It was the same house I had grown up in, the same beige carpet, the same oak cabinets, the same velvet armchair where Dad used to read the paper. But it felt different. It felt occupied. Grant's things were everywhere. His coat was thrown over the banister. His car keys were in the crystal bowl by the door. A stack of his mail, unopened bills, mostly sat on the kitchen counter where Mom usually kept her recipe box. I walked down the hallway to my old bedroom. I hadn't slept there in years, but I still thought of it as mine. I opened the door, expecting to see my old twin bed, my high school posters, the faded wallpaper. Instead, I saw boxes, stacks and stacks of boxes, high-end sneaker boxes, electronics, a flat-screen TV still in its packaging, a set of golf clubs that looked brand new. My room had been turned into a storage unit for Grant's toys. I stepped inside, navigating through the maze of consumerism. This wasn't just clutter. This was hoarding. This was the debris of a man who spent money he didn't have to fill a hole inside himself that couldn't be filled. I ran my hand over a box of designer watches. Why did he have these? He had told me last Christmas he was broke. He had borrowed $500 from me to fix his car. The door to the room creaked. I spun around. Grant was standing in the doorway. He wasn't smiling. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. His voice was sharp. "This is my room," I said. "It is a guest room," he corrected. "And since you are never here, I am using the space." "Grant, what is all this?" I gestured to the boxes. "Where did you get the money for this?" "Mind your own business, Isla," he said. Stepping into the room, he seemed taller than usual, looming over me in the cramped space. "You worry about the sandwiches. I will worry about the finances." "Does Mom know about this?" I asked. "Mom is happy," he said, his eyes cold. "Mom has her son home. That is all she cares about." He stared me down until I looked away. I brushed past him, my shoulder bumping his, and walked out into the hallway. My heart was pounding. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was fear. There was something wrong here: the luxury car, the boxes of expensive goods, the desperation in his eyes that he tried to mask with arrogance. And now, Dad was gone. The only person who had ever looked at Grant with skepticism was gone. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands trembling, I looked out the window at the backyard, at the shed Dad had built, at the dormant garden beds. I was in my childhood home, but I was a stranger. They had closed ranks. They had rewritten the script. But as I stood there, watching the gray evening settle over the yard, I made a silent vow. They could have the house. They could have the narrative. They could have the sympathy of the neighbors. But they weren't going to erase me. And they certainly weren't going to get away with whatever game they were playing. I didn't know then about the gambling debts. I didn't know about the sale. But I knew one thing: the silence in this house was heavy, and it was hiding something, and I was done being quiet. To understand why the sight of my childhood bedroom filled with my brother's unopened luxury goods felt like a physical blow, you have to understand the geography of the James family. Every family has a mythology, a set of stories they tell themselves to make sense of their world. In our house, the mythology was simple: the men were the sun, and the women were the satellites that orbited them, hoping to catch a little reflected warmth. My mother, Marjorie, did not just believe in the patriarchy, she was its most enthusiastic architect. In her eyes, a son was an investment, a pillar, a legacy. A daughter was a temporary guest, someone you fed and clothed until she went off to become someone else's problem or someone else's servant. I grew up with this truth pasted on my forehead like a price tag. It was in the extra pork chop that slid onto Grant's plate while I got the smaller portion. It was in the way my report cards, straight A's and glowing teacher comments, were placed in a drawer, while Grant's participation trophies for sports he barely played were arranged on the mantel like holy relics. The fracture happened when I was 18. I remember the day perfectly. It was a humid Tuesday in late April. I had just been accepted into the State University, a good school with a rigorous business program. I had worked for 4 years to get those grades, studying at the kitchen table long after Grant had gone out with his friends, fueled by the desperate hope that achievement would finally earn me a seat at the table. I put the acceptance letter on the dinner table. Mom glanced at it while spooning mashed potatoes. "That is nice, Isla," she said, her voice carrying the same enthusiasm one might have for a coupon in the mail. "I need to send the deposit by the 1st of May, I said, my heart thumping against my ribs. "And we need to look at the tuition schedule. I have calculated it, and if I work part-time, I will only need help with the first 2 semesters of housing." Mom stopped spooning the potatoes. She put the spoon down with a sharp clink. "Isla," she said, using that reasonable, patient tone she reserved for explaining why we couldn't have a dog. "We cannot afford that." "But you said there was a college fund," I protested. "You said it for years." "There is," she said, looking past me to where Grant was loudly chewing his steak. "But Grant is thinking of going to that private academy in the fall, or maybe starting that business he talked about. We have to keep our liquidity for him. He is the one who will need to support a family one day. You will get married. You don't need a degree to run a house." I looked at my father. He was sitting at the head of the table, his face obscured by the logistics section of the local newspaper. He had to have heard. He knew my grades. He knew how hard I had worked. I waited for the paper to lower. I waited for him to say, "Marjorie, that is not fair. She earned this." The paper did not move. He turned a page, the sound dry and final. That silence was worse than my mother's refusal. My mother's bias was loud and predictable, a storm I could see coming. My father's silence was a betrayal. It felt like agreement. It felt like he was signing off on my insignificance. I moved out 2 months later. I did not take a penny from them. While Grant was given a new sedan and the deposit for a trendy apartment in the city to find himself, I was scrubbing grease traps in a diner from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. I went to a community college first, then transferred, paying for every credit hour with sweat and sleep deprivation. I lived on instant noodles and expired bakery bread. My apartment was a basement unit with a window that looked out onto a brick wall, but on the wall above my desk, I taped every certificate, every dean's list letter, every professional accreditation I earned. They were not just papers, they were proof that I existed. They were proof that I could survive without their permission. For a few years after graduation, I cut them off. It wasn't a dramatic declaration of war, it was an act of self-preservation. I could not stand the phone calls where Mom would talk for 20 minutes about Grant's potential, while ignoring the fact that I had just been promoted to a senior logistics manager. I could not stand the feeling that I was interrupting their lives just by being alive. But biology is a cruel tether. Eventually, the guilt crept back in. I started calling again. I started visiting on holidays. I tried to bridge the gap. I would drive down on a Sunday, bringing groceries or a gift for the house. "Oh, Ela," Mom would say, standing in the doorway, blocking my entry. "Today is not good. Grant is having a hard time with his girlfriend, and we are just focusing on him right now. Maybe next week, always later." I was the option. Grant was the priority. Which brings me back to the room. Standing there in the house on Cedar Hollow Drive, 3 weeks after the funeral, staring at the transformation of my childhood bedroom. The old wounds didn't just ache, they bled. It wasn't just that Grant had taken over the space, it was the sheer, vulgar excess of it. I stepped fully into the room, navigating the maze of cardboard and plastic. I recognized the brands. I worked in supply chain management. I knew what things cost. There was a set of leather luggage in the corner, the tag still on. That brand retailed for $3,000 a set. There was a curved gaming monitor on top of my old dresser that cost more than my first car. There were sneaker boxes stacked like bricks limited editions, the kind that people camped out for. I did the math in my head. There was easily $20,000 worth of merchandise sitting in this room, and yet, Grant had been unemployed for 8 months. Before that, he had been a consultant for a firm that went bust. Before that, he had tried to launch a microbrewery that never brewed a single pint. Mom had told me he was in between opportunities, that he was recalibrating. Recalibrating did not pay for Italian leather and high-end electronics. I felt a cold knot of suspicion tighten in my stomach. Where was this money coming from? Mom and Dad lived on a fixed income. Dad had a pension, and they had Social Security. But they were not wealthy. They were careful. Dad clipped coupons. Mom reused aluminum foil. They did not have $20,000 of disposable income to let Grant turn my bedroom into a bachelor's paradise. Unless they didn't have savings anymore. I thought about the conversation at the funeral home, debts, gambling, selling the house. Suddenly, the timeline began to warp. Grant hadn't just started gambling when Dad died. You don't accumulate a debt that requires selling a 4-bedroom house in 3 weeks. This had been going on for a long time. And the stuff in this room, this wasn't bought with earnings. This was the frantic spending of a manic episode. Or the spending of money that wasn't his loans. Credit cards opened in other people's names. Or perhaps, money drained from accounts that were supposed to be secure. I looked at the flat-screen TV, the black surface reflecting my own pale, angry face. This was an insult. It was a physical manifestation of my mother's philosophy. My space, my history, had been erased to make room for Grant's vices. I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door harder than I intended. The sound echoed through the quiet house. I needed to find them. I needed to see their faces. I walked down the hallway toward the living room. The carpet muffled my footsteps, a habit I had learned as a teenager to avoid drawing attention to myself. I was a ghost in this house, and ghosts move quietly. As I approached the archway that led to the living room, I heard their voices. They were low, urgent, woven together in a tight braid of panic. "He called again this morning," Grant was saying. His voice didn't sound like the confident air now. It sounded wet, terrified. "He said the interest compounds daily. Mom, daily. If we don't list it by Monday, he is going to start making calls. He said he knows where Isla works." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. He knows where Isla works. "He won't touch her," Mom hissed. Her voice was steel, We will get the papers signed. I told you I can guilt her into it. She is weak. Grant, she wants us to love her so bad she will do anything. We just need to frame it right. Tell her it is for Dad's legacy. But she was asking questions about the boxes. Grant whined. She is snooping. She is not snooping. She is just jealous, Mom said dismissively. She has always been jealous of what you have. Ignore her. Once she signs that disclaimer, we can sell, pay the man, and you can start fresh. We will say the market was bad and we didn't get much for the house. She doesn't need to know the numbers. The cruelty of it took my breath away. It wasn't just that they were using me. It was that they held me in such contempt. They saw my desire for connection, my pathetic attempts to win their affection, as a weakness to be exploited. Mom was counting on my desperation for her love to rob me of my inheritance. I stood there for a second, my hand hovering over the wall, feeling the textured wallpaper under my fingertips. I had a choice. I could turn around, leave, and pretend I hadn't heard. I could let them play out their little scene, but I was done being the guest. I stepped into the archway. "Who knows where I work?" I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. The effect was instantaneous. Mom and Grant jerked apart as if they had been physically slapped. Grant dropped the soda can he was holding. It hit the coffee table with a hollow clank and rolled onto the floor, spilling brown liquid onto the beige rug. Mom's hand flew to her throat. They looked at me with wide, deer-in-the-headlights eyes. For a split second, the mask slipped. I didn't see a grieving widow and a dutiful son. I saw two grifters who had just been caught trying to pick the lock. "Isla," Mom said, her voice jumping an octave. She forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "We didn't hear you come in. We were just discussing the memorial service details." "Really?" I said. Walking into the room, I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the rug, looking down at them. "Because it sounded like you were discussing selling my childhood home to pay off a loan shark who is threatening to call my office." Grant's face went the color of dirty snow. "You are hearing things," he stammered. "You are hysterical. It is the grief." "Don't," I said. I held up a hand, and for the first time in my life, Grant shut his mouth. "Don't gaslight me. Grant, not today." I looked at Mom. She was recovering her composure, pulling the shawl of matriarchal authority back around her shoulders. "We are doing what is best for the family, Isla," she said coldly. "If you cared about us, if you really cared about your father's memory, you would trust us, instead of sneaking around listening to private conversations." "I wasn't sneaking," I said. "I live here, or I used to, before my room became a warehouse for Grant's shopping addiction." "That is enough," Mom snapped. She stood up, trying to use her height to intimidate me. But I was wearing heels, and I was taller than her now. "We will discuss the house when the family comes over for dinner on Friday. Until then, I don't want to hear another word about it. You are upsetting your brother." "Upsetting him?" I laughed. A short, dry sound. "I think the man he owes money to is doing a fine job of that already." I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't wait for their response. I walked straight to the front door, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the cold evening air. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my car keys. But it wasn't from fear, it was from adrenaline. They thought they had me. They thought I was the weak, lonely little girl who would sign anything for a crumb of approval. They thought they could bully me into silence. But they had made a fatal error. They had assumed that because I was quiet, I was blind. I got into my car and locked the doors. The check engine light winked at me as I turned the ignition. I didn't drive away immediately. I sat there, staring at the dark windows of the house. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I needed evidence, and I knew exactly where to find it. Mom and Grant were too busy panicking in the living room to notice that I hadn't turned left toward the highway. Instead, I waited until the lights in the living room went out and the upstairs lights came on. Then, I killed the engine. I wasn't leaving. I was going to wait until they were asleep. And then I was going back into the house, not to the guest room, not to the kitchen. I was going to the basement. I was going to the one room Dad had kept locked for 15 years. Mom and Grant thought the secrets were theirs. They were wrong. The real secrets were underground, waiting for the one person who knew where the key was hidden. Grief, for me, was not a tide that washed over the shore. It was a logistical puzzle that needed to be solved in the week leading up to the funeral. While my mother sat in the darkened living room clutching a tissue she never seemed to use, and Grant accepted the condolences of the neighborhood with the grace of a visiting dignitary, I retreated into the one thing that had never betrayed me, a spreadsheet. I turned the dining room table into a command center. My laptop sat open next to a stack of legal pads, each one dedicated to a specific vertical of the funeral process. There was a list for the florist, a list for the obituary word count, a list for the reception catering, and a list of distant relatives who needed to be notified by phone because they did not use email. I worked with the cold, mechanical efficiency of a woman who knows that if she stops moving, she might actually have to feel something. Grant, conversely, had assigned himself the role of chief mourner. He spent his days in the front parlor, wearing a rotation of crisp button-down shirts, waiting for people to drop by with casseroles, when Mrs. C. Gable from down the street brought over a lasagna. Grant held her hands for a beat too long, looking deeply into her eyes as he spoke about the immense void Dad had left behind. He was charming, tragic, and utterly convincing, but I saw what happened when the door closed. The second the latch clicked, the mask fell. He would drop the lasagna on the counter with a heavy thud, his face twisting into a mask of irritation. He would pace the kitchen, checking his phone every 30 seconds, his thumb scrolling violently across the screen. If I asked him a question, Grant, "Do you want the program to be blue or cream, Grant? Did you call Uncle Jerry?" he would snap at me like a cornered dog. "Handle it, Isla," he would hiss, rubbing his temples. "Can't you see I am dealing with the bigger picture here? I have to manage the estate. I have to manage Mom. Stop pestering me with paper colors." I didn't argue. I just added, "Pick paper color" to my list and kept working. It was on the Tuesday before the funeral that the cracks in Grant's performance began to show in ways I could not ignore. I was up late, nearing 2 a.m, finalizing the hymn selection for the service. The house was silent, settled into that heavy, groaning quiet that old houses assume in winter. I needed water. So I padded softly toward the kitchen in my socks, avoiding the creaky floorboard in the hallway out of habit. I heard the voice before I saw the light. It was coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the sorrowful murmur of a grieving son comforting his mother. It was a harsh, desperate whisper. I stopped in the shadows of the dining room, peering through the crack in the swinging door. Grant was standing by the refrigerator, the door open, the cold light illuminating his face. He looked haggard. The charm was gone, replaced by a raw, sweaty fear. He had his phone pressed to his ear so hard his knuckles were white. "I told you, I need a few more days," he whispered. His voice cracked. "No, listen to me. The old man is dead. It is happening. I just need to get the legal stuff sorted. I can't move it until the certificate is signed." He paused, listening to someone on the other end. I watched a bead of sweat roll down his temple. "Don't come here," Grant said, his voice rising in panic before he caught himself. "I said don't come here. It attracts attention. I will have it. After this week, I will have it. 10,000 to start. Then the rest when the asset liquidates. Just back off." My heart hammered against my ribs. Asset liquidates. 10,000 to start. Grant slammed the refrigerator door shut and turned around. I stepped back quickly into the darkness of the dining room, holding my breath. He stormed past the door, muttering curses under his breath, and went up the back stairs to his room. I stood there in the dark for a long time. He wasn't talking about a job interview. He wasn't talking about a business deal. He was talking about a debt, and he was talking about an asset. The next afternoon, the threat materialized. I was on the front porch, sweeping away the dead leaves that had gathered near the welcome mat. When a car slowed down in front of the house, it was a dark sedan. older model, with tinted windows that were illegal in the state of Ohio. It didn't pull into the driveway. It just idled at the curb, the engine rumbling with a low, menacing growl. The window rolled down 3 inches. I couldn't see the face, just the outline of a head and the glow of a cigarette tip. Grant came out of the house at that exact moment, carrying a bag of trash. He froze on the top step. He looked at the car. The car looked at him. Grant dropped the trash bag. It wasn't a clumsy drop. It was a surrender. He walked down the driveway, his gait stiff and unnatural. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He leaned down to the window, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. I saw him gesture toward the house, then toward the funeral home down the street. He held up 5 fingers, then 2. The conversation lasted less than a minute. The window rolled up. The car peeled away, leaving a cloud of gray exhaust hanging in the cold air. Grant stood at the curb for a long moment, staring at the empty street. When he turned back toward the house, his face was the color of ash. "Who was that?" I asked, leaning on my broom. Grant jumped, as if he hadn't realized I was there. "Nobody," he said, too quickly. "Just a guy regarding the catering. Mixed up the address." "The caterer drives a tinted sedan and smokes inside the car?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Drop it, Isla," Grant snapped. "You don't know everything. Stop trying to play detective and just finish the cleaning. Mom wants the porch spotless." He brushed past me, smelling of fear and stale cologne. I went back inside, but my mind was racing. I went to my room, or rather, the guest room I was currently occupying since my old room was a shrine to Grant's spending, and sat down at my laptop. I didn't open a spreadsheet this time. I opened a blank document. I started to list the anomalies. I treated it like a supply chain disruption. Point 1. Grant is unemployed, but has purchased approximately $20,000 worth of luxury goods in the last 6 months. Point 2. Grant is receiving late-night phone calls demanding money and discussing liquidating assets. Point 3. A stranger is staking out the house, and Grant is terrified of him. Point 4. Mom and Grant are pushing for an immediate sale of the house, bypassing the normal probate timeline. The conclusion was mathematical and unavoidable. Grant was in debt. Massive debt. And the asset he promised to liquidate was the roof over our heads. I tried to bring it up with Mom that evening over a silent dinner of reheated casserole. "Mom," I said, pushing a piece of pasta around my plate, "are we sure about selling the house so fast? I mean, shouldn't we wait until the estate is settled? There might be tax implications." Mom looked up, her eyes hard. "We have discussed this, Isla. Grant has looked into the numbers. It is the best way to secure my future." "But what about Dad's records?" I pressed. "He kept files on everything. Maybe we should look through his office first, see if there are other accounts or insurance policies we don't know about." Mom dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Isla," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and performed frailty, "why must you always dig? Why can't you just let things be? Your father is gone, dragging up the past, going through his old papers. It is disrespectful." "It is morbid." "It is not morbid. Mom, it is due diligence," I said. "It is defiance," she corrected. "Grant is handling the finances. You just focus on the funeral. Do not go into your father's office. I don't want you disturbing his things. He liked them a certain way." "She is right, Isla," Grant chimed in, his mouth full. "Dad was private. Respect that. Respect. That was the word they used to silence me. But that night, the night before the funeral, I couldn't sleep. The word respect kept echoing in my head, but it didn't sound like Mom's voice. It sounded like Dad's. Respect the details. Isla, the devil is in the details. At 3 a.m, the house was finally asleep. I could hear Grant snoring in his room down the hall. A rhythmic, oblivious sound. I slipped out of bed, pulling my robe tight around me. I didn't turn on the hallway light. I knew this house by touch. I knew which step on the stairs creaked the third from the top, and which floorboard in the foyer groaned the one near the coat rack. I made my way to the kitchen, past the refrigerator where Grant had begged for his life, and opened the door to the basement. The air that rushed up to meet me was cool and smelled of dry earth and the sweet, lingering scent of cherry tobacco. It was the smell of my father. I descended the wooden stairs, my bare feet cold on the planks. The basement was finished. A relic of the 1990s with its wood paneling and drop ceiling, but it felt miles away from the tension upstairs. This was Dad's domain. I walked past the unused pool table and the stack of holiday decorations to the far corner, to the door that had been locked for as long as I could remember. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key I had taken from the hospital. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a piece of metal should be. I hesitated. Mom had forbidden it. Grant had warned me. If I opened this door, I was crossing a line. I was ceasing to be the compliant daughter. I was becoming something else, a threat. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. Dad took care of his tools. I opened the door and stepped inside, pulling the string for the overhead light. The room was small, windowless, and immaculate. It was lined with metal shelves, each one filled with binders labeled in Dad's neat, block-letter handwriting. Taxes, 1998 to 2005. House maintenance, vehicles. There was no dust. It was as if he had been here yesterday. In the center of the room was his metal desk, clear of clutter except for a single lamp and a stapler. Behind the desk was the filing cabinet, the gray beast I had remembered. I walked around the desk and sat in his chair. It creaked, the sound loud in the silence. I felt a wave of grief so sharp it almost doubled me over. This was where he had hidden. While Mom criticized and Grant took, Dad had sat here, in this silence, keeping the world in order. I touched the handle of the filing cabinet. It was unlocked. I pulled the top drawer open. It slid out on silent bearings, hanging folders, color-coded, green for financial, red for medical, blue for house. I flipped through them. Bank statements, utility bills. Everything was normal, boring, even. Then, at the very back of the drawer, separated from the rest by a thick piece of cardboard, was a single manila folder. It didn't have a typed label like the others. It was labeled in Dad's handwriting, in thick black marker. The letters were jagged, pressed hard into the paper, as if he had written them in a moment of urgency. Property/do not discard. My hands trembled as I reached for it. This wasn't a tax return. This wasn't a warranty for the water heater. This was something else. I pulled the folder out. It was thick, heavy with documents. I opened it on the desk, the yellow light casting long shadows across the pages. The first page wasn't a deed. It wasn't a title. It was a formation document for a limited liability company. I squinted at the date, 2010, 15 years ago. I turned the page, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. I saw my name, Isla James. I saw my signature, a younger, loopier version of my signature, from when I was in my early 20s. I frowned, a memory scratching at the back of my mind. Dad asking me to sign some papers for insurance purposes when I visited home one weekend. I had signed them without reading, trusting him implicitly. I turned another page, and then another, and then I stopped breathing. The document in front of me was an operating agreement. It detailed the assets held by the company. Specifically, a single asset, the real property located at 140 Cedar Hollow Drive. I read the clause at the bottom of the page. Sole member and manager, Isla James. I sat back in the chair, the room spinning slightly. The house wasn't Mom's. It wasn't Dad's. It certainly wasn't Grant's. Technically, legally, quietly the house had been mine for 15 years. And then I saw the sticky note attached to the back of the agreement. It was Dad's handwriting again, scrawled in blue ink, for when they try to take it from you. I stared at the note, tears finally spilling over and hitting the paper. He knew. All those years of silence, all those years I thought he was weak, thought he was complicit. He had been playing a long game. He had known exactly who Grant was. He had known exactly what Mom would do. He had built a fortress around me. and I hadn't even known I was inside it. I closed the folder. I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I switched off the light, clutched the folder to my chest, and sat in the dark, listening to the house settle. They were going to announce the sale tomorrow. Grant was going to make his speech. Mom was going to nod. Let them. I ran my thumb over the label of the folder. Do not discard. I wasn't going to discard it. I was going to use it to burn their entire plan to the ground. The silence in the basement was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums, under the harsh yellow glow of the desk lamp. The file I had pulled from the back of the cabinet seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I opened the manila folder. The paper inside was crisp, high-quality bond, the kind lawyers use to justify their billable hours. At the top of the first page was a logo I had never seen before, a stylized line drawing of a pine tree sitting atop a jagged peak. Beside it, in bold, sans serif font, were the words, Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. I stared at the name, Juniper Ridge. It sounded like a retirement community or a subdivision of cookie-cutter houses, not a secret company buried in my father's filing cabinet. I searched my memory for the reference. Then, it clicked. It was the name of the camping spot in the Smokies where Dad used to take me when I was a kid. Just him and me. Because Grant complained about the mosquitoes and Mom refused to sleep on the ground. It was our place, a secret geography. I turned the page, my fingers feeling dry and clumsy. The document was an Articles of Organization filing for the state of Ohio, dated October 14th, 2010. 2010. I did the mental math. I was 24 then. I was fresh out of college, working 2 jobs, barely scraping by, and completely estranged from the family finances. My eyes scanned down to the signature block at the bottom of the 3rd page. There, in blue ink that had faded slightly over the last 15 years, was a signature, Isla Marie James. I traced the loops of the J with my fingertip. It was my signature, but it looked different, younger, less rushed than the way I sign things now. It was the signature of a girl who still trusted people. A memory, hazy and fragmented, floated to the surface of my mind. It was a Thanksgiving visit. I had been in the kitchen, helping Mom with the dishes. When Dad had called me into the living room, he had a stack of papers on the coffee table. Just some administrative updates for the estate. Isla, he had said, his voice casual, almost bored. Life insurance beneficiaries, emergency contacts. I need you to sign here, here, and here, just in case something happens to me. I hadn't read them. I had been too focused on getting back to the kitchen before Mom started criticizing my drying technique. I had signed where his finger pointed, blindly trusting the man who had taught me how to change a tire. I realized now, sitting in the cold basement, that he had counted on that trust, but he hadn't used it to exploit me. He had used it to arm me. I turned to the operating agreement. Section 4, Paragraph 2. The sole member of the company shall be Isla Marie James. The member shall have 100% of the voting rights and sole authority over the disposition of all assets held by the company. I read it again, and then a 3rd time. Sole member, sole authority. I flipped to the schedule of assets. There was only one item listed, the residential property located at 140 Cedar Hollow Drive, Columbus, Ohio. The air left my lungs in a sharp hiss. My father had transferred the house into this LLC 15 years ago, and he had made me the owner, the sole owner, which meant that for the last decade and a half, while Mom acted like the queen of the manor and Grant treated the place like his future inheritance, they had been living in my house. Why, the question swirled in my head. Why do this and never tell me? I looked at the date again. 2010. That was the year Grant had dropped out of his second college program and borrowed Dad's credit card to pay off a misunderstanding with a bookie. It was the first time the gambling had become a visible problem. Dad had seen the leak in the boat before anyone else, and instead of trying to patch it, he had built a life raft, put me on it, and cast it off quietly so the others wouldn't sink it. He knew that if he died, Mom would give everything to Grant, and Grant would lose it all. I closed the folder. my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. This changed everything. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a nuclear weapon. If I walked upstairs and showed this to them, the sale would stop instantly. The realtor would be fired. The loan shark would well. The loan shark would still be a problem. But he wouldn't be getting this house. But I couldn't just walk up there waving it. I needed to be sure. I needed to understand the current status. Was the LLC still active? Had Dad dissolved it later? Had he forged a dissolution document? I pulled a single sheet from the back of the file, the most recent annual report filing. Dated just 3 months ago. Dad had paid the filing fee. The company was active. It was in good standing. I took the folder and slipped it under my sweater, holding it against my stomach like a shield. I turned off the lamp, plunging the basement back into darkness, and crept upstairs. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, the folder hidden between the mattress and the box spring. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words, "sole member." The next morning, the day of the funeral, the house was a whirlwind of activity. The phone was ringing constantly. Neighbors were dropping off more food. Mom was in the kitchen, directing the chaos with the manic energy of a general before battle. I walked into the kitchen, holding a single photocopy of the first page of the LLC document. I had left the original and the rest of the file safe in my car trunk before dawn. "Mom," I said. She was arranging a platter of cookies. "Not now. Isla, the hearse will be here in 2 hours. Make sure Grant is up. He needs to shave." "Mom, I found something," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I placed the photocopy on the counter, right next to the sugar cookies. She glanced at it, her hand freezing mid-air. For a second, just a split second, I saw recognition in her eyes. It was a flicker of fear, sharp and immediate. Then, the mask slammed back into place. She swiped the paper off the counter as if it were a piece of trash. "Where did you get this?" she snapped. "I was looking for the insurance policy in Dad's office." I lied smoothly. "I found a whole file for this company, Juniper Ridge. It lists the house as an asset, and it has my name on it." Mom laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound. She crumpled the paper in her hand. "Oh, that," she said, turning back to the cookies. "That is ancient history. Isla, your father dabbled in some real estate ideas years ago. He set up a few companies to protect his liability when he was doing contracting work. It never came to anything." "But it is dated 2010, I said. "And I found a filing from this year." "Clerical error," she said, waving a hand. "He probably forgot to cancel the auto-renewal on the filing fee. He was forgetful at the end. You know that. The company was dissolved years ago. It means nothing." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "And listen to me, Isla," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Do not bring this up today. Do not mention it to your aunts, and certainly do not mention it to the lawyer. It would just confuse things. We have a clear path to sell the house, and muddying the waters with old, defunct paperwork will just delay everything. You want to help your brother, don't you?" "I want to know the truth," I said. "The truth is that you are causing trouble," she hissed. "Just like you always do. Now, throw that away and go get dressed." She turned her back on me, effectively ending the conversation. But she hadn't thrown the paper away. She had shoved the crumpled ball into the pocket of her apron. She was lying. If it was dissolved, she would have told me to check the state records. If it was nothing, she wouldn't have told me to hide it from the lawyer. "What is the secret meeting about?" I spun around. Grant was standing in the doorway. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin had a gray, clammy sheen to it. He was holding a cup of coffee with a shaking hand. "Nothing," Mom said quickly, spinning around with a bright, fake smile. "Isla was just asking about the flower arrangements." Grant looked at me, then at Mom, then back to me. He wasn't buying it. Paranoia was radiating off him in waves. "You have that look on your face," he said to me, stepping into the kitchen. "The one you used to get when you were tattletelling on me." "I am 39. Grant," I said. "I don't tattletale." He saw the paper in Mom's pocket. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was paper, and in his world, paper usually meant trouble. "You playing auditor again, Isla?" he sneered, taking a sip of coffee, "trying to count the pennies before we even get to the bank. You know, for someone who claims to be so independent, you sure seem interested in the family money all of a sudden." "I am interested in clarity," I said. "We have clarity," Grant snapped. "I am the executor. Well, Mom is, and I am acting for her. That is all the clarity you need. So why don't you go put on your black dress and let the adults handle the business?" He walked past me and opened the fridge, staring blankly into it. I looked at Mom. She gave me a single, sharp nod, a command to obey. I left the kitchen. I walked calmly down the hallway, into the guest bathroom, and locked the door. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. Dissolved, clerical error, ancient history, lies, all of it. If the company was dissolved, the house would be back in Dad's name, or Mom's. But they were rushing to sell. They were terrified of delays. Why? Because a title search would reveal the LLC. They needed to get a buyer to sign a contract before the title company did a deep dive, hoping to bulldoze through the legalities with Mom's executor status. Or maybe they didn't even know the extent of it. Maybe they just knew there was a complication, and they were trying to outrun it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had the original documents in the trunk of my car, but that wasn't enough. Physical paper could be burned. It could be lost. It could be shredded. I needed backups. I waited until I heard Grant go upstairs to shower and Mom go into the living room to answer the door. I slipped out the side door and sprinted to my car. I popped the trunk and opened the folder again. I didn't just take photos. I used a scanning app, ensuring every word was legible. Click, the articles of organization. Click, the operating agreement. Click, the signature page with my name. Click, the schedule of assets. Click, the sticky note from Dad. I uploaded the files immediately to a secure cloud drive. Then I emailed them to my work address. Then I emailed them to a private Gmail account I hadn't used in years. Sent. The little swoosh sound of the email sending felt better than any eulogy. It was the sound of a lock snapping shut. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, breathing in the cold air. I looked at the house. It looked peaceful from the outside. A classic suburban colonial with black shutters and a manicured lawn. But inside, it was a trap. I got out of the car, smoothed my hair, and walked back toward the house. I had to play the part. I had to be the grieving daughter for a few more hours. I had to let them think they had won. As I passed the open window of the master bedroom on the first floor, Mom's room, I heard her voice. She wasn't shouting, but the tone was intense, vibrating with a ruthless determination. I pressed myself against the siding, hidden by a large rhododendron bush. "I don't care what she found," Mom was saying. She was on the phone. "It is just paper. Arthur, we can contest it. We can say she manipulated him. He was sick at the end." Pause. "No. Grant needs the money by Tuesday. We cannot wait for probate court." Pause. Then, the line that made my blood turn to ice. "Don't worry about Isla. I will make her sign the disclaimer. I know which buttons to push. She is desperate for me to look at her. I will promise her whatever she wants, a family heirloom, a place at the table, whatever. I will make her sign. She has no choice. She never does." I stood there, the cold brick of the house pressing into my back. She is desperate for me to look at her. It was the truest and most cruel thing she had ever said. She knew my weakness was my love for her, my desire to be accepted, and she was planning to use that love as a weapon to strip me of the one thing Dad had left to protect me. I pulled away from the wall. I walked to the front door. I wasn't crying. I was done crying. She has no choice. Mom had said, she was wrong. I had a choice. Dad had given me a choice 15 years ago, and today, I was going to start making it. The air in the funeral home room felt sucked dry of oxygen the moment Grant finished his performance. He stepped down from the podium, his face flushed with the exertion of his own lies, and for a heartbeat, I thought the floor might open up and swallow the entire charade. It did not. Instead, my mother stood up. She did not walk to the podium with the hesitancy of a grieving widow. She moved with the fluid, terrifying grace of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in front of her vanity mirror. She took the microphone, her small hands clutching the stand, and looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors, cousins, my father's old drinking buddies. Then, she looked at me. It was a soft look, a maternal look, the kind of look a predator gives prey before the final strike. "Grant is right," she said, her voice trembling just enough to register as heartbreak. "We have to be practical. We have to be strong." She paused, letting a single, dry sob escape her throat. The room leaned in. "And I want to thank my daughter, Isla," she continued. "Isla has been so sensible. She has her life in the city. She has been independent for so long, building her career, traveling, living her own life away from us. She understands that a house like this is too much for me, and that Grant, my son, is the one who needs to be here to settle the family affairs." The subtext hit me like a physical slap. Isla doesn't need us. Isla left us. Isla is rich and cold and doesn't care about this house. Grant is the one who stayed. It was a masterclass in character assassination disguised as praise. She had just publicly absolved me of any claim to my heritage, while simultaneously painting me as the distant, wealthy outsider who had no emotional stake in the family home. A murmur rippled through the room. I could hear the whispers as clearly as if they were shouted. "She is right," my great-aunt Martha whispered loudly to the woman beside her. "The girl is gone. She has her own money. It is the son who has to look after the mother. The son is the pillar." "Grant needs the help," another voice muttered. "Isla is fine. She probably doesn't even want the old place. A daughter who marries belongs to strangers." I could almost hear the sentiment. Even if they phrased it in American suburban platitudes, a daughter leaves, a son remains. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes pressing down on me. They weren't looking at me with sympathy. They were looking at me with judgment. They saw a woman in a sharp blazer who hadn't visited enough, who didn't cry enough, and who was now apparently signing away her father's legacy because she was too independent to care. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull the file from my bag, the file that proved I was the pillar, I was the owner. I was the one Dad trusted. But I caught my mother's eye again. She was challenging me. "Go ahead," her eyes said. "Make a scene. Scream at your father's funeral. Prove everyone right about you being the unstable, ungrateful daughter." I swallowed the scream. It tasted like bile. I nodded, stiffly. Once, it was the only way to survive the moment without disintegrating. The service ended, and the room decompressed into a shuffle of bodies moving toward the exit. I needed air. I needed to get away from the suffocating scent of lilies and the sympathetic pats on the back that felt more like shoves. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The Ohio winter air was biting, slapping my cheeks with a wet, gray cold. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. That was when I saw him. Grant was standing near the edge of the parking lot, near a black sedan that was definitely not part of the funeral procession. He was talking to a man in a navy blue suit, a suit that was too shiny, too tight, too salesman. The man wasn't offering condolences. He was holding a thick folder, a real estate folder. I recognized the logo on the front Premier Reality Group. I watched, frozen behind a concrete planter. As the man opened the folder, he pointed to a line at the bottom of a document. Grant didn't read it. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled his signature on the hood of the car. My stomach turned. My father had been in the ground for less than an hour. The dirt wasn't even settled, and Grant was signing listing agreements in the parking lot. The man in the suit smiled a predatory flashing of teeth and shook Grant's hand. He reached into the back seat of his car and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. It was a metal frame, a yard sign. He didn't put it in the ground there. Of course, He handed it to Grant. Grant took it, looking around nervously, and quickly shoved it into the trunk of his SUV, covering it with a blanket. I stepped back, my heart pounding against my ribs. It wasn't just a plan. It wasn't just a discussion. It was done. They had already hired the agent. They were going to plant that sign in the yard of Cedar Hollow Drive the moment the guests left. As the agent drove away, I pulled out my phone. I zoomed in on the license plate of the agent's car. Then I snapped a photo of the back of Grant's SUV, where the corner of the real estate sign was just visible under the blanket. Evidence. I told myself, just keep gathering evidence. The drive back to the house was a blur. I didn't go to the reception at the community center. I went straight to Cedar Hollow Drive. I sat in the dark living room, waiting. They arrived 2 hours later. Mom came in first, kicking off her heels with a groan of exhaustion. Grant followed, carrying a tray of leftover sandwiches. He looked lighter, almost giddy, the adrenaline of the public performance still coursing through him. "Well," Mom said, collapsing onto the sofa. "That went well. Everyone was very supportive. Aunt Martha thinks the sale is a brilliant idea." "Of course she does," Grant said, loosening his tie. "She knows the market. We are going to make a killing. Mom, I told the agent we want a cash offer. Fast close." I stood up from the armchair in the corner. I had been sitting in the shadows, and my movement made both of them jump. "Isla," Mom gasped, clutching her chest. "Lord, don't sneak up on people like that. Why are you sitting in the dark?" "Why did you lie?" I asked. My voice was low, devoid of the emotion they wanted to see. "Lie," Grant scoffed, walking past me to the kitchen. "Nobody lied. We managed the narrative. That is what adults do. You told 40 people I agreed to sell the house," I said, turning to face him. "You said the family was united. You never asked me. You never even told me until today." Grant slammed the sandwich tray down on the counter. "Because you would have said no," he shouted. "You would have whined about sentiment and memories and dragged the whole thing out for 6 months. We don't have 6 months. Isla." "Why?" I pressed. "Why don't we have 6 months? The mortgage is paid off. Dad paid it off in 1998. I have the records. There is no bank breathing down your neck. So who is it?" "Grant." Grant's face twisted. For a second, the fear I had seen in the funeral home parking lot flickered back into his eyes. "It is none of your business," he spat. "And honestly, Isla, why do you even care? Do you even consider this your home anymore?" "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. "You heard me," Grant sneered. "You moved out 20 years ago. You come back once a year for turkey and presents. You don't live here. You don't mow the lawn. You don't fix the leaks. This isn't your home. It is an asset. And right now, it is an asset that Mom needs to survive." "That is rich," I laughed. A harsh, humorless sound. "Mom needs it, or you need it." I saw the guy in the parking lot. "Grant, I saw you put the sign in your trunk. You are selling Dad's legacy to pay for your mistakes." "Stop it." My mother's voice cracked through the room like a whip. She stood up, her face pale with rage. "How dare you?" she whispered. She walked over to me, getting right in my face. "How dare you stand there and lecture your brother about mistakes? Mom, he is gambling away the house." "You were not here," she screamed. The silence that followed was deafening. "You were not here," she repeated, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "When your father collapsed in the kitchen, where were you? You were in your little apartment, with your spreadsheets and your career. Grant was here. Grant held him while the ambulance came. Grant rode with me. You drove in 3 hours later." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a low blow. It was the lowest blow. She was using my geographic distance, a distance she had encouraged by making me feel unwelcome as proof of my lack of love. "That doesn't give you the right to sell the house without my consent," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't need your consent," Mom said coldly. "I am his wife. I am the executor, and I am telling you, as your mother, that we are selling. If you try to stop us, if you try to make a scene, or drag this into court. I will tell everyone. I will tell the whole family that you abandoned us when your father was dying and then came back just to fight for money. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the daughter who sued her grieving mother?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman whose approval I had spent 3 decades chasing, and I realized, with a clarity that was both liberating and heartbreaking, that she did not love me. She loved the idea of a family. She loved her son. But she did not love me. I looked at Grant. He was leaning against the counter, smirking. He thought he had won. He thought Mom's emotional nuke had incinerated my resistance. "We need the cash by Tuesday," Grant said, his voice dropping the pretense. "The agent has an investor lined up. Quick inspection tomorrow. Contract on Monday. Funds wired by Wednesday. If you mess this up, Isla, things are going to get bad. For all of us." Tuesday. Today was Friday. They had 4 days. They were terrified. They were desperate. And they were sloppy. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I let the fight drain out of my face. "Fine," I whispered. Grant blinked. "What?" "Fine," I said louder. "You are right. I wasn't here. I don't live here. If you need the money that bad, fine." Mom let out a long exhale, her posture relaxing. "See," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched away, but she ignored it. "I knew you would be reasonable. It is for the best. Isla, truly." "I am going to bed," I said. "I am tired." "We will need you to sign that waiver tomorrow," Grant called after me. "First thing." "Sure," I said without turning around. "First thing." I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I went into the guest room and closed the door. I locked it. I didn't throw myself on the bed. I didn't cry. I went to my bag and pulled out the file folder I had retrieved from the car trunk earlier. I laid it on the bedspread. Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC, sole member, Isla Marie James. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use guilt and public humiliation and emotional blackmail. They wanted to erase me from this family. Grant needed the money by Tuesday. I checked the date on my watch. I had 3 days to prepare the trap. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the lawyer listed on the funeral program, Mr. Calvin Mercer. It was late, but I knew lawyers who handled estates for men like my father often worked late. The voicemail picked up. "Mr. Mercer?" I said, my voice steady and cold. "This is Isla James, daughter of Robert James. I believe you are holding a letter for me, and I believe we need to talk about the property on Cedar Hollow Drive before my brother sells a house he does not own." I hung up. Downstairs. I could hear Grant and Mom opening a bottle of wine. I could hear them laughing. It was the sound of people who thought they had gotten away with murder. I turned off the light and sat in the dark, the file resting on my lap. Laugh while you can. I thought, because Tuesday is coming. The ambush was set for Sunday afternoon, 3 days after the funeral. My mother called it a family brunch to honor Dad's memory. But as soon as I walked into the dining room, I knew it was a trial. The room was crowded. It wasn't just Mom and Grant. There were about 15 people squeezed around the extended oak table. My grandmother was there, looking frail but sharp-eyed in her wheelchair at the head. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob were there. Several cousins I hadn't seen in 5 years were there, nursing cups of coffee and avoiding eye contact. The atmosphere was not one of mourning. It was the tense, humid air of a courtroom before the gavel falls. "Sit down, Isla," Mom said. She wasn't asking. She pointed to a chair in the middle of the long side of the table, the defendant's seat. Grant sat directly across from me, flanked by Uncle Bob and a cousin named Mike who worked in insurance. I sat. I kept my posture straight, my hands folded in my lap. I was wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to Grant, who was in a suit again, looking every inch the aggrieved executor. The table was laden with bagels, fruit, and quiche, but no one was eating. In the center of the table, clearing a space among the platters, sat a single, crisp document. "We are all here," Mom began. Standing up, she placed a hand on Grant's shoulder. Because we need to move forward. Losing Robert has been devastating. But life, unfortunately, comes with bills. She looked around the room, gathering sympathy like a collection plate. Grant and I have looked at the finances, she continued. And the reality is hard. The house is too big. The upkeep is too much. To ensure I can live comfortably for the rest of my years, and to help Grant get back on his feet after sacrificing so much to care for his father. We have decided to sell the property. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Sensible, Uncle Bob grunted. Market is good right now. Marjorie shouldn't have to worry about the roof leaking, Aunt Linda added. Nodding vigorously, Mom smiled. A sad, brave little smile. Exactly. We have a cash offer on the table. It is a blessing, really, but to close the deal quickly, and to avoid months of probate court that would drain the estate's value, we need to present a united front. Grant reached out and slid the document across the table toward me. It moved smoothly over the polished wood, stopping inches from my hand. This is a standard disclaimer of interest, Grant said. His voice was calm, but his leg was bouncing under the table, shaking the silverware. I glanced at his wrist. He had checked his watch 3 times in the last 2 minutes. It just says that you, Isla James, waive any potential claim to the real estate assets of the deceased, Grant explained, as if he were talking to a slow child. Since Dad died without a will, I raised an eyebrow. Without a will. We couldn't find one. Mom interjected quickly. So, technically, the state divides things, but we all know Dad wanted me to have the house, and he wanted Grant to help me manage it. This paper just formalizes that. It clears the title so the buyer can wire the funds next week. I looked at the paper. It was short, brutal. Isla James, hereby irrevocably disclaim if I have no rights to the house, I said, looking Grant in the eye. And if Dad wanted you to have it, why do you need my signature? The room went quiet. The air conditioning hummed. Grant's smile faltered. It is a formality. Isla, the title company just wants to be sure no one pops up later causing trouble. We want to be done with this. We want to mourn in peace. Mourn in peace, I repeated, by selling the house 3 days after the funeral. We are doing this for Mom, Grant snapped, his facade cracking. Why do you have to be so difficult? Why do you have to make everything about you? I am not making it about me, I said. I am asking a question. If the house belongs to Mom, she can sell it. Why do you need me to sign away a right you say I don't have? Because we want to do it fast, Grant shouted. He slammed his hand on the table. A coffee cup rattled. The offer expires Tuesday. If we don't have a clean title by then, the buyer walks. Do you want that? Do you want Mom to lose this money because you wanted to play lawyer? Grant, calm down, Uncle Bob said, putting a hand on his arm. He looked at me, his expression stern. Isla, look. Your brother is under a lot of stress. We all know you have your own life. You have a good job. You don't need this money. Your mother does. Don't be the one to hold things up. It looks greedy. Greedy? The word hung in the air. Mom stepped in then. She walked around the table and stood behind me. She put her hands on my shoulders. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. Isla, she said softly, for the audience, I know you feel left out. I know you think we favored Grant. But this isn't about the past. This is about survival. If you don't sign this, the sale falls through. And if the sale falls through, she lowered her voice so only I could hear the edge in it. I will have to tell everyone about how you refused to help. I will have to tell them that when I needed you most, you turned your back on your family for a slice of an inheritance you didn't earn. I looked around the table. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. They were all looking at me with a mixture of pity and disapproval. They didn't know about the gambling. They didn't know about the loan shark. They didn't know about the Juniper Ridge LLC. They just saw a daughter refusing to help her widowed mother. If I refused now, right here, I would be the villain. I would be ostracized. I reached out and picked up the pen lying on top of the document. It was a cheap plastic pen, not one of Dad's nice ones. Grant stopped bouncing his leg. He leaned forward, his eyes hungry. I lowered the pen to the paper. I hovered the tip over the signature line. I thought about the filing cabinet in the basement. I thought about the sticky note. For when they try to take it from you, they were trying to take it, not just the house. They were trying to take my dignity. They were trying to bully me into erasing myself. I looked at the ink tip. Then I looked at Grant. He was sweating. He wasn't grieving. He was terrified. If I signed this, he would get the money. He would pay off the shark. And then what? 6 months later, he would be back in debt. He would drain Mom's accounts. He would destroy everything Dad built, and he would do it with my permission. I wasn't protecting the house for me. I was protecting it from him. I put the pen down. I can't, I said. Grant looked like he had been shot. What? I can't sign this today, I said, my voice steady. I need to review it. I need to understand the tax implications for myself, and I need to think about it. Think about it, Grant screamed. He stood up, knocking his chair over. There is nothing to think about. You sign it. We sell. Mom gets the money. What is there to think about? Grant, Grandma's voice cut through the noise, sharp and surprising. Sit down. Grant froze, then slowly righted his chair, his face purple with rage. Isla, Mom said, her hands leaving my shoulders. Her voice was ice. We don't have time for you to think. The buyer needs an answer. Then tell the buyer to wait, I said, standing up. If it is a legitimate offer, they will wait 24 hours. You have until tomorrow morning, Grant hissed. If that paper isn't signed by 9 in the morning, Isla, I swear to God. You swear what? I challenged. You will tell on me. Go ahead. Tell them I wanted to read a legal document before signing it. I think most people would call that prudent. I grabbed my purse. I didn't look at my relatives. I didn't want to see the judgment. I walked to the door. Isla, Mom called out. If you walk out that door without signing, don't bother coming back for Christmas. Don't bother coming back at all. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. It was the threat she had always held over me, the threat of exile. I will let you know my decision tomorrow, I said, and I walked out. I drove straight back to my studio apartment in the city. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to grip the steering wheel until my fingers cramped. I felt sick. I felt guilty. The conditioning of 39 years was screaming at me that I was a bad daughter, that I was selfish, that I should just give them what they wanted to make the shouting stop. But then I remembered the basement. I walked into my apartment. It was dark and quiet. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled the file out of my bag, the original file I had retrieved from the car trunk. I spread the papers out on my cheap bistro table. Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC, sole member Isla Marie James. I wasn't the defendant. I was the judge. I looked at the funeral program I had tossed on the counter days ago. On the back, in small print, was the name of the lawyer Dad had used for his small affairs. Calvin Mercer, attorney at law. I picked up my phone. It was Sunday. Lawyers didn't work on Sundays. But Dad's note had been specific. For when they try to take it. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. Then, a voicemail. You have reached the office of Calvin Mercer. Please leave a message. Mr. Mercer, I said. My name is Isla James, Robert James's daughter. I'm holding a folder labeled Juniper Ridge Holdings. My brother is trying to sell the house on Cedar Hollow Drive on Tuesday. I need to see you. Immediately. I hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. The ID said, Calvin Mercer. Miss James, a gravelly voice said. It sounded old, tired, but sharp. I was wondering when you would find that key. Can you be at my office tomorrow at 8? I will be there, I said. Bring the file, he said, and bring your brother's listing agreement if you have it. I have a photo of the sign in his trunk, I said. Good, Mercer said. That will do. Get some sleep. Miss James, you are going to need it. The war starts tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I looked at the papers spread out under the light. For the first time since Dad died, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like his daughter. Monday morning broke over Columbus with a sky the color of a bruised peach. It was 8 o'clock when I stood in front of the building listed on Calvin Mercer's business card. It was not one of the glass and steel monoliths downtown where the corporate sharks swam. It was a 3-story brick structure in German Village, with ivy crawling up the facade and a heavy oak door that looked like it had been guarding secrets since the 1920s. I buzzed the intercom. The lock buzzed back with a startling, angry sound. The office of Calvin Mercer was on the 2nd floor. The waiting room smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and the ghost of cigar smoke from a bygone era. The carpet was a thick Persian runner that muffled my footsteps, and the walls were lined with law books that looked like they hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. A secretary with reading glasses on a chain around her neck looked up. "Miss James?" she asked. She didn't ask for my name. She knew. "Mr. Mercer is expecting you. Go right in." I walked into the inner office. Calvin Mercer was standing by the window, looking out at the street. He was a small man, perhaps in his 70s, wearing a tweed suit that seemed a size too large for his shrinking frame. But when he turned around, his eyes were sharp, blue, and utterly alert. "I was wondering when you would call," he said. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer condolences. He just looked at me with a mixture of appraisal and relief. "You knew?" I asked, gripping the handle of my bag where the file rested. "Your father gave me specific instructions," Mercer said, walking over to his massive mahogany desk and motioning for me to sit. He said, "Calvin, if I die, do not call Isla. Do not send her a letter. Wait until she calls you." I asked him why on earth I should play games with his estate. He said, "Because if she doesn't find the key herself, she isn't ready for the fight." I sat down, the leather chair groaning under me. He knew there would be a fight. He counted on it, Mercer said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a file that matched the one in my bag perfectly. Robert was a quiet man, Isla, but he wasn't blind. He watched, he listened, and he planned. I pulled my file out and laid it on the desk. "I found this in the basement. Juniper Ridge Holdings," Mercer nodded. "Established October 14th, 2010. "The house," I said. "It is the only asset." "Correct. So," I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "My mother thinks she is selling the house tomorrow. My brother has a buyer lined up. They are pressuring me to sign a disclaimer of interest. If I don't sign, they threaten to cut me off." Mercer let out a dry, hacking laugh. He leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. "They can threaten all they want, Miss James, but they cannot sell what they do not own." "But Mom is the executor," I said. "Since there is no will." "There is no will for the house because the house is not part of Robert James's personal estate," Mercer interrupted, his voice sharpening. "This is where people get confused. The house is corporate property. It belongs to Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. He opened the file and turned the document around so I could face it. He tapped the operating agreement with a manicured fingernail. "And according to this agreement, upon the death of the initial manager, your father control transfers immediately and automatically to the sole member." He looked me in the eye. "You are the sole member, Isla. You have been since 2010. You don't inherit the house. You own the company that owns the house. You have owned it for 15 years. Your mother has been living in your corporate asset as a tenant at will." The room spun slightly. I had suspected it. I had read the words. But hearing a lawyer say it out loud made it real. The power dynamic that had defined my entire life, Mom as the owner, me as the guest, was a lie. "But why?" I asked. "Why did he do it this way? Why didn't he just tell me?" Mercer sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Because of your brother," I stiffened. "Grant. In 2010, Mercer said, putting his glasses back on. Grant was 26. He had just dropped out of that third college program. Your father found out Grant had taken a second mortgage out on a car he didn't own. He also found credit card statements, online poker, sports betting. It was small then, but your father recognized the pattern. Mercer leaned forward. Robert came to me in a panic. He said, "Calvin, Marjorie will never stop him. She will give him everything. If I die first, she will liquidate the house to pay his debts, and she will end up on the street." He wanted to protect your mother, Isla, but he knew the only way to protect her was to take the checkbook out of her hands. "So he gave it to me," I whispered. "He bet on you," Mercer corrected. "He told me, Isla is the only one who can say no. He knew you were tough. He knew you were independent. He set up this LLC so that the moment he was gone, you would be the firewall between Grant's addiction and your mother's survival." I felt tears pricking my eyes. All those years, when I thought Dad was ignoring me. When I thought he was complicit in Mom's favoritism, he had been quietly building a fortress and handing me the keys. He hadn't defended me at the dinner table because he was defending me in the courthouse. "Is it airtight?" I asked. "Mom said it was dissolved. She said it was a clerical error," Mercer scoffed. He opened another folder, revealing a stack of receipts. "Your father came here every January to pay the filing fee in cash. He had me notarize the minutes of the annual meeting, a meeting of one every single year. We have 15 years of continuous, unbroken corporate history. We have tax returns filed for the LLC. We have the deed transfer recorded with the county in 2010. Miss James, this is the cleanest paper trail I have seen in 40 years of practice. The Supreme Court couldn't break this LLC." He pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a printout from the Ohio Secretary of State's website, dated this morning. "Status active, Agent Calvin Mercer." "They have nothing," Mercer said. "They have a listing agreement signed by a man who has no title, for a property that isn't in probate." I sat back, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 days. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "Grant has promised the buyer a clean title by Tuesday. Tomorrow." Mercer smiled. It was a wolfish smile. "We stop them. But we don't just stop the sale. We stop the narrative." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a long white envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with my father's initials, R.J. "He left this for you," Mercer said, his voice softening. "He told me to give it to you only when you were ready to use the weapon he built." I took the envelope. My name was written on the front in Dad's shaky block letters, Isla, just Isla. I ran my thumb over the wax seal. "Should I open it?" "Not here," Mercer said. "Read it when you are alone. It is personal. What we need to discuss now is the strategy." He clasped his hands on the desk. "Your mother and brother are operating on the assumption that you are isolated, that you are weak, that you will fold under social pressure. They have gathered the family to witness your submission, haven't they?" "Yes," I said. "They had a whole tribunal at brunch yesterday." "Good," Mercer said. "We are going to invite them back." I want you to call your mother," Mercer instructed. "Tell her you are ready to resolve the issue of the house. Tell her you want a formal reading of the estate documents. Tell her to invite everyone, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins who were at that brunch. Tell her that if she wants your signature, she needs to do it properly, in front of a lawyer." "She will think I am surrendering," I said. "Exactly," Mercer nodded. "She will think you are bringing a lawyer to review the disclaimer before you sign it. She will invite the audience because she wants to publicly shame you one last time. She wants them to see you bend the knee. And instead, Mercer said, tapping the LLC file, we are going to read the operating agreement of Juniper Ridge Holdings. We are going to reveal the true ownership of the house in front of the very audience she assembled to pressure you. We are going to let the truth appear exactly where the lie was constructed." It was brutal. It was theatrical. It was exactly the kind of public reckoning my mother terrified of. "Can we do it tomorrow?" I asked, "before the buyer's deadline?" "I will clear my schedule," Mercer said. 10 o'clock at your mother's house." "Make it 10, I agreed. Grant thinks the money is being wired on Wednesday. He will be desperate enough to agree to anything that looks like progress. Mercer stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. There is one more thing. Isla, documentation is powerful, but testimony is better. He pulled out a Rolodex, an actual physical Rolodex, and flipped through the cards. When your father set up this LLC, he didn't just use me. He used his accountant to value the initial assets. She was there when he signed the papers. She remembers the conversation vividly because Robert was crying. He told her he was breaking his own heart to save his home. Mercer pulled a card out. Ruth Harlan, he said. She retired 5 years ago, but she still lives in Upper Arlington. I called her this morning. She said she remembers you. She remembers your father showing her a picture of you graduating from college. Ruth, I repeated. I remembered the name. Dad used to mention dropping off his tax box at Ruth's house. She is willing to come tomorrow, Mercer said. She has the original valuation papers, and she has something else, a sworn affidavit from your father, signed in 2012, explicitly stating that he was of sound mind and that he was transferring the asset to prevent dissipation by other family members. It names Grant specifically. My jaw dropped. Dad had named names. If Grant tries to claim fraud, Mercer said, Ruth is the nail in the coffin. She is a neutral third party with professional standing. I stood up, clutching the file and the sealed letter. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Don't thank me yet, he said, walking me to the door. Tomorrow is going to be ugly. When you strip the illusion away from a family like yours, they don't just get angry, they get dangerous. Your brother is cornered, and a cornered animal bites. I know, I said. I saw the fear in his eyes. He owes money to bad people. Then let's make sure the house isn't the payment, Mercer said. Go home, Isla. Read your letter, call your mother, and wear a suit. Tomorrow, you are not the daughter. You are the sole member. I walked out of the office and down the stairs, the heavy oak door closing behind me with a solid, reassuring thud. The sun had broken through the gray clouds, casting a pale winter light over the brick streets. I walked to my car, the letter burning a hole in my bag. I had the law. I had the paper trail. I had the witness. Now, all I had to do was walk back into the lion's den and tell them that the cage they thought they were building for me was actually built for them. I sat in my car and dialed my mother's number. Isla, she answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, anxious. It is 9:30. Have you signed it? I have made a decision. Mom, I said, my voice calm. But I want to do it right. I want Mr. Mercer to come over tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, and I want everyone there, Aunt Martha, Uncle Bob, everyone who was at the brunch. Why? She asked suspiciously. Why do we need an audience? Because, I said. I want everyone to be clear on exactly what is happening with Dad's legacy. I want no secrets. There was a pause. I could hear her calculating. She thought I was capitulating. She thought I wanted to make a speech about sacrifice and then sign the paper. She saw it as a victory lap. Fine, she said. 10 o'clock. But the papers better be signed by noon. Isla, or else. Don't worry, Mom, I said. By noon, everything will be signed, sealed, and delivered. I hung up. I started the car. The check engine light was still on, but for the first time in years, I didn't care. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. I left Mercer's office with a name and an address burning a hole in my pocket. Ruth Harlan. She lived in Upper Arlington, a quiet, leafy suburb that felt a world away from the frantic desperation on Cedar Hollow Drive. I drove there straight away. My mind was still reeling from the revelation in Mercer's office, but I knew I needed to lock down every loose end before tomorrow. Mercer had the law, but I needed the history. I needed to understand the man who had silently built a legal fortress around me while I was busy resenting him for his silence. Ruth lived in a small brick bungalow with a manicured lawn. She was waiting for me on the porch. A woman in her 70s with sharp, bird-like eyes and a posture that suggested she had spent a lifetime correcting other people's math errors. Isla, she said as I walked up the driveway. She didn't smile, but her expression was not unkind. It was assessing. You look like him, around the eyes. You knew my father well, I asked. I did his taxes for 30 years, she said, opening the door and ushering me into a living room that smelled of lavender and old books. You learn a lot about a man by looking at his deductions. Robert was honest, painfully honest. He would call me if he found a $10 receipt he had forgotten to declare. She sat me down at a small round table and poured tea from a ceramic pot. Then, she placed a hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. He talked about you, you know, she said softly. I looked down at my tea. He didn't talk to me. We barely spoke for the last 10 years. He knew that, Ruth said. He told me, Ruth, she thinks I am weak. She thinks I let Marjorie walk all over me. And I would ask him why he didn't just tell you the truth. Why he didn't tell you that he was the one paying your tuition shortfalls in secret, channeling it through the university so you thought it was a grant. My head snapped up. What? The sophomore year grant, Ruth said, nodding. The Alumni Hardship Fund. That was Robert. He cashed out his life insurance dividends. He didn't want you to know because he knew you were too proud to take his money if you thought it came from the family pot. I felt a lump form in my throat. Hard and painful, I had spent that entire year thinking I had lucked into a generic scholarship. I had never thanked him. He wasn't a man of words. Isla, Ruth continued. He didn't know how to say, I love you, or I am proud of you. The words got stuck in his throat, so he signed his name instead. Every document in that LLC, every filing fee he paid that was him saying he loved you, he signed his affection. She stood up and walked to a sideboard, pulling out a thick ledger. But there is something else you need to know, she said, her voice turning hard, about why he created the company in 2010. It wasn't just general worry about Grant's gambling, it was specific. She opened the ledger to a page marked with a red tab. In late 2009, your brother tried to take a second mortgage out on the house. Ruth said, he forged your father's signature on the application. The bank caught it because the notary was a friend of Robert's. Your father could have sent Grant to prison for fraud. Instead, he paid the bank a penalty to hush it up. I stared at her. He forged Dad's signature. He did, Ruth said. And Robert realized then that as long as the house was in his personal name, Grant would find a way to steal it. He would trick your mother, or he would forge another paper. That was the week Robert came to me and said, we need to lock it up. We need to put it somewhere Grant can't reach. That is when Juniper Ridge was born. She looked me dead in the eye. Your father spent the last 15 years guarding that door. Isla, now you are the one standing in front of it. I drove away from Ruth's house with a new kind of clarity. It wasn't just about money. It was about a war that had been raging in the shadows for 15 years. A war between my father's silent protection and my brother's voracious appetite for destruction. My phone rang as I merged onto the highway. It was Grant. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I put it on speaker, my hands gripping the wheel. Hello, Grant? Hail, little sister, he said. His voice was bright, manic, dripping with a condescending cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Just checking in. You got the time for tomorrow, right? 10 o'clock. Mom is making coffee cake. I will be there, I said. 10 o'clock. Good, he said. And hey, bring a pen. A nice one. We want the signature to look official. Once we get this done, we can all breathe, right? Just get it over with and move on. Is that what you think? I asked. That we will just move on? Of course, he laughed. A nervous, tittering sound. We are family, Isla. Families fight. They make up. Once the house is sold and the money is in the bank, everyone will relax, Mom will be happy, I will be settled, and you can go back to your city life with a clear conscience. He really believed it. He believed that he could bully me into submission, strip the family of its biggest asset, and then pat me on the head and send me on my way. He had no idea that he was walking into an execution. "I will see you tomorrow, Grant," I said. "Make sure everyone is there." "Oh, they will be," he promised. "Aunt Martha wouldn't miss it. She wants to see you do the right thing." I hung up. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Mom. Her voice was different. It wasn't the commanding matriarch I had heard at the funeral. It was thin, frayed, teetering on the edge of panic. "Isla," she whispered. "Are you coming?" "You promised." "I am coming." "Mom," I said. "I told you, 10 o'clock. Please," she said. It was a word I hadn't heard her say to me in years. "Please, just sign it. You don't know how bad it is." "Tell me," I said. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building and killed the engine. "How bad is it, Mom?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a sob. "He owes $80,000. She wept. "He borrowed it from people who don't use banks. They came to the house. Isla, the man in the parking lot, he said if we don't have the money by Wednesday, they are going to hurt him. They said they would break his legs." 80,000, I repeated. The number hung in the air like a storm cloud. "I gave him everything I had," Mom cried. "I drained the savings account. I cashed in your father's small life insurance policy. It wasn't enough. The house is all we have left. Please, I can't lose my son." I sat there, listening to her sob for the son who had drained her to the last drop. She had traded away her own tomorrow to cover his mistakes. And now she was asking me to sacrifice myself so he wouldn't have to feel the cold. "I understand, Mom," I said softly. "I understand exactly what's happening." "So you'll sign?" she begged. "You'll save him?" "I'll do what has to be done," I said. "I'll see you at 10. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the weight of the day riding heavy on my shoulders. I locked the door, switched on the lone desk lamp, and drew the sealed envelope from my bag. The wax seal was cool beneath my thumb. R.J. I opened it. Inside was a letter on lined yellow paper, the kind Dad used for supply lists. The handwriting wavered, the letters leaning, shaped by a hand that was steadily losing its strength. "My dearest Isla, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the wolves are at the door. I am sorry. I know those are words you wanted to hear from me for a long time, and I am sorry I was too much of a coward to say them to your face. I let your mother push you away. I let you feel like a stranger in your own house. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I know now I was just keeping my head down. But I watched you. I watched you leave. I watched you work 2 jobs. I watched you build a life without asking for a penny, and I was so proud of you. Isla, that it hurt. I knew a long time ago that Grant was broken. I don't know why. Maybe we gave him too much. Maybe he just has a hole in him that can't be filled. But I knew that if I left the house to your mother, Grant would take it. He would take it, lose it, and leave your mother with nothing. So I gave it to the only person strong enough to hold the line. I gave it to you. I know they will hate you for it. I know they will call you names. They will say you are stealing their inheritance. But you are not stealing. Isla, you are saving. You are the only one I trust with what matters. You are the only one who knows the value of things, not just the price. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them make you feel small. You are the head of this family now, whether they know it or not. Love. Dad. I put the letter down. I didn't cry. The tears had all been used up. Instead, I felt a steel rod straighten in my spine. He had trusted me. When the whole world told me I was the extra, the spare, the afterthought, my father had secretly appointed me the guardian. I stood up. It was 7 in the evening. I had 15 hours until the meeting. I went into crisis management mode. I cleared my bistro table and turned it into a war room. I printed 3 copies of the operating agreement. I printed the affidavit from Ruth Harlan. I printed the timeline of the LLC filings. I printed the photo of Grant's forged signature that Ruth had emailed me. I printed the picture of the yard sign in Grant's trunk. I organized them into dossiers, one for Mom, one for Grant, one for Mercer, and one for me. I was stapling the final packet when my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Mercer. Subject urgent. Attempted access Isla. My contact at the real estate agency just tipped me off. Your brother is trying to schedule a pre-listing walkthrough for the investor tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Before our meeting, I have already sent a cease and desist to the broker attached to the deed record. The walkthrough is canceled, but be aware he is trying to move the timeline up. See you at 10. I stared at the screen. Grant was trying to sell the house out from under me an hour before I arrived. He was going to let strangers walk through my father's home, appraising the walls, counting the bedrooms, treating it like a carcass to be butchered. I checked the time. It was late, but I called the funeral home's after-hours line. I needed one more detail. I needed the exact time the family viewing had ended, to correlate with the timestamp on the photo of the real estate agent in the parking lot. I wrote it all down. I didn't sleep well, but I didn't need sleep. I needed dawn. At 8 in the morning, I showered and dressed. I didn't wear the soft, muted colors I usually wore to family gatherings to blend in. I put on my charcoal gray suit, the one I wore to negotiate contracts with shipping magnates. I put on heels that clicked sharply against the floor. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like the little sister. I didn't look like the daughter. I looked like the soul member. I grabbed the thick folder of documents and drove to Cedar Hollow Drive. The street was quiet. The winter sun was bright and unforgiving. I pulled into the driveway. Grant's SUV was there, parked crookedly. Next to it were 3 other cars: Aunt Martha's Buick, Uncle Bob's truck, and a sedan I didn't recognize. The audience was assembled. I walked up the front path. I could see them through the bay window. They were sitting in the living room, a circle of judgment waiting for the accused. I opened the front door. The conversation stopped instantly. Grant was standing by the fireplace, holding a cup of coffee. He looked up, and a wide, predatory grin spread across his face. He winked at me. "Right on time," he said, checking his watch. "And look at you, all dressed up for a signature." Mom was sitting on the sofa, wringing her hands. She looked at me with pleading, watery eyes. "Isla," she said, "come in. Sit down. There is coffee." "I don't need coffee," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Well, let's get to it then." Uncle Bob grunted from the armchair. "We all have places to be." "Actually," I said, stepping aside to hold the door open, "we are waiting for one more person." A black town car pulled up to the curb. Calvin Mercer stepped out. He was carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain bricks. He walked up the path, his face impassive, his eyes scanning the room as he entered. Grant's smile faltered. "Who is this Isla? I told you. No outsiders." "This is not an outsider," I said. "This is Calvin Mercer, Dad's lawyer." "We don't need a lawyer," Grant snapped. Stepping forward, "We have the forms. We just need a signature." Mercer walked past me. He didn't look at Grant. He walked straight to the dining room table, which had been cleared of the breakfast dishes. He placed his briefcase on the wood with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Miss James," Mercer said, turning to me. "Shall we—" Grant looked at Mom. Mom looked at me, terrified. The relatives shifted in their seats, sensing that the script had just changed. Mercer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of files. He laid them out in a neat row. Then he looked at Grant. "Mr. James," Mercer said, his voice gravelly and calm, "I suggest you sit down, and I suggest you put down that coffee, because what we are about to discuss is going to require your full attention." He walked over to the double doors of the dining room and closed them, shutting out the noise of the street, shutting us all in together. "We are not here to sign a disclaimer," Mercer announced. "We are here to read the records of the Juniper Ridge Holdings Company." Grant laughed, a nervous, cracking sound. "The what? That is nothing. That is some old paperwork." Mercer ignored him. He looked at me. "Ready? Miss James." I looked at my mother. I looked at my brother. I looked at the family that had treated me like a ghost for 20 years. I am ready, I said. Mercer opened the first file. Then let us begin. Calvin Mercer did not start with a shout. He started with a whisper of paper. The room was so quiet you could hear the baseboard heaters ticking. Mercer adjusted his glasses, opened the first file, and began to read in a monotone voice that was designed to bore. He listed the small, tangible debris of a life lived by a man who valued function over form. Item 1, Mercer read, the 2016 Ford pickup truck. Title to be transferred to Marjorie James. Mom nodded, letting out a small, relieved sigh. She reached for her coffee cup, her hands shaking slightly less than before. Item 2, Mercer continued. The contents of the savings account at Fifth Third Bank, totaling $4,512.33, to be transferred to Marjorie James. Item 3, the collection of vintage woodworking tools located in the shed, to be transferred to Grant James. Grant scoffed, leaning back against the mantel. Tools, he muttered. Great, thanks, Dad. But I saw his shoulders drop. He was relaxing. He thought this was the pattern. He thought Mercer was just reading the preamble before getting to the main event, the house. The asset that would save his skin. Mercer continued for 10 minutes. He distributed the watch, the wedding ring, the old coin collection. It was a lullaby of bureaucracy. By the time he stacked the first set of papers to the side, the tension in the room had evaporated. My aunts were whispering about lunch plans. Uncle Bob was checking his phone. They thought the show was over. They thought the disclaimer I was supposed to sign was just a formality to be handled after the coffee cake. Well, Uncle Bob said, slapping his knees, seems straightforward enough. Robert was a simple man. Now, about the house on Cedar Hollow. We should probably get that paperwork signed so Grant can meet his buyer. Grant straightened up, flashing that salesman grin. Right, the disclaimer. Isla, do you have it? Mercer didn't look up. He placed his hand on the thickest file in the stack, the one he had not opened yet. We will not be needing a disclaimer for the house, Mercer said. Grant froze. Excuse me? The title company said, the title company is operating under the assumption that the house is part of Robert James's personal estate. Mercer interrupted. He looked up, his blue eyes hard as flint. It is not? What do you mean? Mom asked, her voice trembling. We have lived here for 40 years. Of course it is his estate. No, Marjorie, Mercer said gently, but with absolute finality. The property located at 140 Cedar Hollow Drive was transferred out of your husband's personal name on October 14th, 2010. The silence that followed was heavy, confused, and suffocating. Transferred, Grant asked, stepping away from the fireplace. Charm. Transferred to who did he sell it? Is there a mortgage? He did not sell it, Mercer said. He moved it into a holding company, a protective structure. Mercer flipped the file open. He turned the document around so the bold black letters faced the room. Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. The house is the sole asset of this company, Mercer explained. And according to the operating agreement, upon the death of the initial manager, full control and 100% ownership interest passes immediately to the designated sole member. Who is the member? Aunt Martha demanded from the back of the room. Is it Marjorie? Mercer shook his head. He looked at me. The sole member and manager of Juniper Ridge Holdings, Mercer announced, his voice ringing off the walls, is Isla Marie James. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. The information hit the room like a physical shockwave. I watched the realization travel across their faces from confusion to disbelief to shock. Then came the explosion. That is a lie, Grant screamed. He lunged toward the table, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. That is a lie. She forged it. She printed that yesterday. I saw her with the files. Sit down, Mr. James, Mercer barked. It was a command, not a suggestion. It is fraud, Grant yelled, looking wildly at our relatives. She is trying to steal the house. She hasn't lived here in 20 years. Dad would never do that. He knew Mom needed this house. Dad knew exactly what you needed. Grant, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was steady, anchored by the truth sitting on the table. That is why he did it. I have the chain of title here, Mercer said, sliding a certified document across the table. Recorded with the Franklin County Recorder's Office in 2010. I have 15 years of tax returns filed with the IRS for the LLC, listing Isla James as the member. I have the notarized minutes of every annual meeting, signed by your father. Mercer reached into the file and pulled out a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. And, Mercer added, I have this, a sworn affidavit from Ruth Harlan, the certified public accountant who oversaw the creation of the entity. She is prepared to testify in court that Robert James was of sound mind and that he explicitly stated his intent was to protect the asset from, and I quote, dissipation by family members with a history of financial instability. Grant looked like he had been slapped. He stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. Mom let out a low, keen sound. She slumped back onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. He didn't trust me, she whispered. My own husband. He didn't trust me. He trusted you to love your son. Mom, I said softly. He knew that if Grant asked, you would give him everything, and he was right. You already drained the savings. You already cashed the insurance. If Dad hadn't done this, we wouldn't have a house to argue about. We would have a foreclosure notice. The room shifted. I could feel it. The relatives who had glared at me yesterday, who had called me selfish and cold, were now looking at Grant. They were looking at his expensive suit, his manic energy, his desperation. They were looking at the evidence that had been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. They realized that the greedy daughter narrative was a lie. They realized they had been drafted as foot soldiers in a con game orchestrated by a desperate gambler. Uncle Bob picked up the deed document. He put on his reading glasses. He read it in silence. Then he put it down and looked at Grant. You knew, Uncle Bob said. You tried to rush the sale because you knew something like this might pop up. That is why you wanted the disclaimer signed so fast. I didn't know, Grant stammered. I swear. I just the buyer. The buyer who threatened to break your legs. I asked. Grant went silent. The color drained from his face. The room gasped. We know about the debt. Grant, I said. We know about the $80,000. We know about the man in the parking lot. I stood up. I walked to the head of the table. I didn't look like a guest anymore. I looked like the owner. I am not stealing this house, I said, looking at my aunts and cousins. I am accepting the responsibility my father gave me. He built this structure to ensure that his wife would always have a roof over her head, and to ensure that his hard work wouldn't be gambled away on a Tuesday afternoon. I turned to Mom. She was looking up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She looked small. Mom, I said, you can stay. She blinked. What? This is your home, I said. I am not selling it. I will never sell it. You can live here for the rest of your life. We will sign a lease agreement $1 a month. Oh. It protects you. It means no one can ever force you out. Not a bank, not a loan shark, and not your son. I turned to Grant. He was leaning against the wall, looking like a deflated balloon. But you, Grant, I said, you cannot live here. Isla, Mom started to protest. He has nowhere to go. He has to leave, I said firmly. He has 24 hours to vacate the premises. I will not have loan sharks coming to this door. I will not have my father's house used as collateral for illegal debts. You can't do that, Grant whispered. They will kill me. I will pay for a rehab facility, I said. A good one, inpatient, 6 months. I will pay for it in full. That is the help I am offering. But I will not give you 1 cent of cash, and I will not let you sell 1 brick of this house. Grant stared at me with pure hatred. You are enjoying this. No, I said, feeling a profound sadness wash over me. I am not enjoying this. I am just finally doing what Dad couldn't do. I am saying no. The room was silent. I waited for someone to object. I waited for Aunt Martha to call me ungrateful. Instead, a voice came from the corner near the window. She is right. It was my grandmother. She was sitting in her wheelchair, her hands clasped over her cane. She hadn't spoken a word since the meeting began. Now, she lifted her head and looked at Mom. Robert came to me, Grandma said, her voice raspy but clear. Years ago, he sat on my porch and cried. He said he was afraid he was failing you. Marjorie, he said he was afraid he was loving Grant to death. She turned her gaze to me. He told me he had a plan. He didn't tell me what it was, but he said, Mother, if anything happens to me, don't worry about the house. Isla will hold the line. She tapped her cane on the floor. Don't blame the child who was strong enough to carry the burden you dropped, she said to the room. Isla is the only reason we are not standing in a parking lot right now. It was the final verdict. The matriarch had spoken. Grant looked around the room. He saw no allies. He saw only pity and judgment. He let out a strangled cry of rage, kicked the coffee table, and stormed out of the front door. We heard his SUV engine roar to life and peel out of the driveway. Mom put her head on the table and wept, but this time, it wasn't the weeping of a victim. It was the weeping of someone who had finally been forced to face the truth. Mercer closed his briefcase. I will draw up the lease agreement for your mother, Miss James, and I will file the eviction notice for Grant. Just to have it on record, you handled that well. Thank you, Calvin, I said. I walked Mom to her room. I made her tea. I told her we would figure out the grocery bills. I told her she was safe. She didn't say thank you. She just held my hand for a moment, her grip weak, before turning away to sleep. It wasn't a total reconciliation, but it was a start. I walked out to the driveway. The sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the snow. A car was idling at the end of the street. It was Grant's SUV. I walked down the driveway. He rolled down the window. He looked terrible. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a frightened boy who had broken a window and didn't know how to fix it. They really will hurt me, Isla, he said. His voice was shaking. I know, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card. It was for a facility in Cleveland. I had called them last night. They have a bed waiting, I said. If you go now, you're safe. The sharks won't touch you inside. And by the time you get out, we will figure out a payment plan. I will help you negotiate. But you have to go, now. He looked at the card. He looked at the house. Then he looked at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't look at me like a resource to be exploited. He looked at me like a sister. I am sorry, he whispered. Go, I said. He took the card. He put the car in gear and drove away. He wasn't going to the loan shark. He was going north, toward Cleveland. I turned back to the house, my house. I walked inside and went down to the basement. I locked the filing cabinet. Then I went upstairs to the second floor. I opened the door to my old bedroom. It was still filled with Grant's boxes, the monuments to his waist. I began to move them. I dragged the sneaker boxes into the hall. I stacked the luggage by the stairs. I cleared the space. When the room was empty, I sat on the edge of the bed. The walls were still the pale yellow I had chosen when I was 16. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Dad's old keychain, the one I had taken from the hospital. There was a small plastic fob attached to it, scratched and faded. I had never looked at it closely before. I held it up to the light. It was a photo, a tiny, passport-sized photo of a little girl with pigtails, grinning missing-toothed at the camera. It was me. He had carried me with him every day, while I was feeling forgotten, while I was feeling like the spare part. He had been carrying my smile in his pocket. He hadn't known how to talk to me, how to bridge the gap Mom had created. So he had loved me the only way he knew how. He had built a legal fortress. He had turned his love into iron and paper and law, a shield that would wait 15 years to deploy. I curled my fingers around the keys. I wasn't the guest anymore. I wasn't the ghost. I was the daughter of Robert James, and I was home. Thank you so much for listening to Isla's story. If you have ever felt like the invisible child in your family, or if you have had to be the strong one when everyone else was falling apart, I want to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I love reading your stories from all over the world. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button, and press the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Remember, protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. See you in the next story.